Vicious Circle. Chapter 1. The Return. Emma Carter stood on the balcony of one of New York City's most luxurious hotels, watching as the city drowned in lights. It was her first night in this city after years of absence. New York, the city where she had left part of her soul, where she had vowed never to return. But now Emma stood here, ready for the most crucial stage of her life, revenge. Her appearance had changed beyond recognition. Confident, successful, and cold-blooded, she had left behind the naive girl she once was. The one who had caused her nightmares had long forgotten her existence. But Emma remembered everything. Every day in captivity, every moment of humiliation. She had not returned to forgive or forget. She had returned to claim what was rightfully hers. Emma turned and slowly walked toward the door, leaving the evening city behind. Inside the room, there was an atmosphere of luxury, but her thoughts were far from these comforts. Tonight was the first step on her path to revenge. She had studied every step, every detail, and now her plan was beginning to unfold. She donned an expensive yet discreetly elegant outfit that emphasized her status. This city loved those who knew how to present themselves, and Emma was not going to appear as an outsider. Her destination was one of the city's elite clubs, where all of society's elite gathered. There she planned to find the first key figure in her game. The club she approached glittered with lights and luxury, as if the gray, gloomy streets of the city didn't exist outside. Inside, life was in full swing. Expensive drinks, music, conversations, all of this created an illusion of celebration, behind which human vices were hidden. Emma confidently stepped inside, catching the glances of men and envious sighs of women. She was like a fish in water in this environment, though years ago such places had only caused her fear and hatred. Now she felt strong, knowing that this time all the cards were in her hands. She moved towards the bar and ordered a cocktail. Her gaze slid across the room, searching for the right face among the noisy crowd. Emma knew it was here, among all these people she had seen in her plans. But tonight she was not in a hurry. She knew that time was on her side. At some point, she noticed a young woman who clearly stood out from the rest. The girl was surrounded by friends, laughing and waving a glass of champagne. Her movements were light, but her eyes betrayed a hidden tension that only someone who had lived in constant struggle could notice. Emma decided to approach the girl as if their meeting were pure coincidence. She smoothly moved closer, trying to catch her eye. When their eyes met, Emma smiled as if recognizing an old acquaintance. "Oh, hello," Emma said, slightly tilting her head. "I think we've met here before." The girl looked at her, first with slight bewilderment, then with interest. "Yes, that's right," she replied with a smile. "You're Emma, right?" "Exactly. And you're Sophie?" Emma asked, pretending to recall her name. Sophie nodded, and within moments, they were exchanging words as if they were old friends. The conversation flowed easily. Emma skillfully adapted to Sophie's mood, discussing topics that interested her specifically. She deftly avoided personal subjects, keeping the conversation within the bounds of light and carefree chatter. "It's so noisy here," Sophie complained after a while. "Maybe we can find somewhere cozier. I have my own VIP room. We can chat there in peace." Internally, Emma smiled, realizing her plan was progressing. But her face showed only mild curiosity. "Of course, that sounds great," she replied as if the idea had just come to her. Sophie led her through the crowd to a quieter part of the club. The VIP room was tastefully decorated. Soft sofas, dim lighting, and a minimalist design created an atmosphere of privacy and luxury. Here, one could truly relax and talk without the surrounding noise. They ordered another round of cocktails, and Emma continued to steer the conversation, gradually deepening her bond with Sophie. The girl seemed impressed by her new acquaintance. She saw in Emma a person who understood her interests and with whom she could find solace from her daily worries. Emma discreetly controlled every aspect of the conversation. She skillfully shifted topics, guiding the dialogue in such a way as to create an illusion of complete openness and mutual understanding for Sophie. This was not just a conversation. It was the art of manipulation that Emma had perfected over the years. At some point, when the conversation had reached a peak of intimacy, Emma made a subtle gesture to the bartender. Within a minute, a new cocktail was served to her, with a small dose of an aphrodisiac mixed in. Emma carefully observed as Sophie raised the glass to her lips and took a few sips. At that moment, she knew that soon, she would have complete control over the situation. A little later, when the conversation seemed as open as possible, Emma suggested. You know, sometimes it feels like everyone here is wearing masks. I wish I could find a place where I could just be myself. Slightly tipsy and relaxed, Sophie nodded. I know a place like that. I have a small room for relaxation here in the club. There you can forget about all this fuss. Emma smiled as if the suggested place was an unexpected but pleasant surprise. That would be wonderful. They headed to a small room hidden from prying eyes. When the door closed behind them, Emma noticed that Sophie's state had begun to change. Her movements became more unrestrained, her gaze clouded. The aphrodisiac had started to take effect. Emma suggested that Sophie lie down and rest, while she discreetly set up a small camera in the corner of the room, carefully masking it. She knew that soon, another guest would arrive. Sophie, no longer fully aware of what was happening, obediently followed the advice and lay down on the couch. Her breathing became irregular, and her body craved the closeness that would soon arrive. Emma left the room and quickly headed to the club's security office. There, Leo, Victor's bodyguard, who had been ordered to watch over Sophie, was already waiting for her. He was ready to follow any orders without asking questions. Go to the relaxation room, she said briefly, avoiding unnecessary details. Leo nodded and headed in the indicated direction. Emma, holding her breath, knew her plan was beginning to unfold. Everything was going exactly as she had planned. Emma left the club, casting a final glance at the windows illuminated by the city lights. Now, all she had to do was wait and watch how everything would play out. This evening marked a decisive step on the path to her goal. Chapter 2. The past is not forgotten. Emma sat in the dimly lit room of her hotel, staring out into the night. New York, with its eternal bustle and lights, seemed endless, but for her, it was merely a backdrop for the revenge that had been brewing for years. She absent-mindedly ran her fingers along the edge of her whiskey glass, slowly sinking into memories. She was only 20 when she first arrived in this city. Young, full of hope and dreams, she sought her place in the world. Her beauty and naivety attracted the wrong people with whom she should never have gotten involved. Emma recalled how one man, with a deceptively kind smile, promised her the world and a bright future, but instead lured her into a dark world from which it seemed impossible to escape. Victor Morgan. His name echoed in her mind like a sentence. He was the one who shattered her dreams, who turned her life into hell. Many years ago, he had tricked her into his brothel, using blackmail and threats to keep her there. Emma had no choice. Every step she took, every word she spoke was under Victor's control. She hated him, but she had no other way out. Her thoughts returned to the moment when she first realized she could no longer endure it. It was one night when she desperately stared at her reflection in a dirty mirror. She made a promise to herself that one day she would escape this hell and exact her revenge. That promise became her only support, her reason for living. But her plan required time. Emma understood that hasty actions could cost her life. She began saving money, pretending to resign herself to her fate, but in reality, every step she took was meticulously calculated. She searched for any weaknesses in Victor, any connections that could help her escape. And then, one day, luck smiled upon her. One of Victor's regular clients offered to help her in exchange for her silence about his dark deeds. Emma knew she couldn't trust him, but she had no other choice. She agreed, and one night, seizing the moment when the guards had lowered their vigilance, she fled. From that moment on, she ceased to be Emma Carter. She became someone else, someone who skillfully hid her identity, moving from one city to another, from one country to another. Emma studied, worked, learned about business, and finally, after achieving success, began planning her return. Now she was here, in the same city where her story had begun. But this time she was not a victim. She had returned to be the hunter. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Emma lifted her head, shaking off the shadows of the past. She approached the door and cautiously opened it. Standing before her was a middle-aged man with a serious expression. "Everything is ready, Miss Carter," he said, nodding slightly. Emma silently looked at him and then nodded in return. The man left and Emma closed the door, once again plunging into her thoughts. Everything was going according to plan. She reassured herself that her path was the right one and that soon her revenge would be complete. Emma walked to the table, picked up the phone and dialed a number. The response was immediate. "We begin," she said shortly, and the voice on the other end quietly agreed. That night the first move was made. But the game was just beginning. Chapter 3. Winning Trust. Once again, Emma found herself in the same club where she had first seen her, the girl whose life was steeped in luxury and casual indulgence. She knew that Sophie would be here. People like her didn't come to such places for entertainment. They came to confirm their status. Emma was ready to play her part to the end. Inside the club, the atmosphere was as lively as ever. Music, laughter, and flashes of light created the illusion of carefree fun, behind which lay hidden desires and ambitions. Emma entered smoothly, as if she had been part of this life from the beginning. Her posture, confident gaze, and slight smile on her lips conveyed that she belonged here. She quickly spotted Sophie. The girl was surrounded by friends, laughing and waving a glass of champagne. Her movements were light, but her eyes were empty, as if her thoughts were far away. Emma felt an intuitive connection to her but didn't approach right away. Instead, she decided to observe from a distance, studying her habits and mannerisms. The evening progressed, and Emma, remaining in the shadows, watched as events unfolded around her. She was ready to intervene at any moment, but this evening was only the first of many. Revenge was a delicate matter, requiring time and patience. When the club began to empty out and guests started to leave, Emma knew it was time to act. She took a few steps towards Sophie but didn't approach too closely. Her plan involved creating an invisible connection that would later become visible. Emma cast a final glance at the club, where she would return again. In her mind, she was already constructing a picture of the future, where every move was calculated and thought out. Tonight was just the beginning. Chapter 4. The Aphrodisiac. Emma woke up early, just as the city was still slumbering under a blanket of gray dawn. The night had been long, but every step had been calculated, every minute utilized to the fullest. She knew time was not on her side, and she needed to act quickly and decisively. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Emma picked up the laptop that lay on the nightstand. She connected a small flash drive and began copying the video recorded the previous night. Every second of the footage was a brick in the wall of revenge she was building against Victor. The video was not just incriminating evidence. It was her most powerful weapon. On the screen, frames flickered. A dark room, Sophie slowly succumbing to the effects of the aphrodisiac, and then Leo suddenly appearing in the shot. The camera captured every moment, every nuance of what was happening, creating the perfect picture for her future plan. Emma watched the screen without blinking, checking the quality of the recording. Her fingers trembled slightly, but it wasn't weakness. It was anticipation of what was about to happen. She replayed the key moments several times, ensuring that the video had captured everything necessary. It was the perfect evidence of Sophie's downfall, capable of ruining not only her life but also her father's. When the copying was complete, Emma removed the flash drive and hid it in a safe place. In her mind, the next step was already taking shape. The video had to be made public in a way that everyone who mattered would see it. This wouldn't just humiliate Sophie and destroy her reputation. It would also mark the beginning of the end for Victor. His daughter was his weakness, and by destroying her life, Emma was striking directly at Victor's heart. But before starting the next phase, Emma decided to check on the progress of her plans to dismantle Victor's business. She was confident that once the video reached the right hands, it would trigger a chain reaction that would lead to the collapse of his empire. Emma walked to the window, letting the morning light into the room. The city was waking up, and she knew that soon the phone calls, discussions, and panic would begin. Her plan was in motion, and now it was just a matter of watching it unfold. Later that day, Emma sat in a small cafe in Manhattan, checking messages on her phone. She had already anonymously sent the video to several influential journalists and bloggers who specialized in exposés and scandals. Emma understood that as soon as they received the recording, its publication would be a matter of hours. And indeed, soon her phone buzzed. Emma quickly read the message. One of the leading online publications had published an article about the scandalous video involving Sophie Morgan, the daughter of well-known businessman Victor Morgan. The video was already spreading across social media, sparking a storm of discussions and gossip. Emma felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. She knew this moment would be a turning point for the entire Morgan family. Victor would lose his influence, and Sophie would lose her standing in society. Victor Morgan, as usual, was in his office when he received the call. At first, he didn't pay much attention to it, but when the voice on the other end trembled with excitement, he sensed something was wrong. Turning on his computer and opening the news sites, Victor saw the headlines that seized his attention. The compromising video of his daughter was on the front pages. His world began to crumble before his eyes. His first reaction was rage. Victor immediately summoned his subordinates, demanding they find the person responsible and remove the video from the internet. But it was useless. The video had already spread too far. Every attempt to erase it was met with a new wave of copies and comments. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Emma watched the unfolding events with the calm of an observer. She knew that for Victor, this was just the beginning of the end. He was a man used to power and control, but now everyone around him would begin to turn against him. Friends and partners would abandon him, while competitors would start whispering behind his back, waiting for the moment to strike. In the days that followed, Victor Morgan's empire began to fall apart. Business partners terminated contracts, clients canceled orders, and the police began taking a closer look at his affairs. Victor, seeing his world collapse, began to realize that he no longer controlled the situation. Emma knew Victor would start searching for her. She was ready for this but wasn't afraid. Now that his power was broken, he was merely a shadow of the man who once held her in fear. She knew he would try to find her to exact revenge, but he no longer had the resources to threaten her plans. Every day brought new news of Victor Morgan's downfall. Emma relished it, knowing that her revenge was nearly complete. But the final blow, the last act of her plan, was still to come. Chapter 5. The Fall of the Empire. Victor Morgan sat in his luxurious office, but this time he felt neither the usual calm nor control. His world was collapsing with every passing second. The phone on his desk rang incessantly, but he didn't pick it up. All attempts to stop the spread of the video had failed. The news feeds were filled with scandalous headlines, and his name had become synonymous with disgrace. Oofy. Victor clenched his fists, feeling a surge of anger and despair. Her life was destroyed, her reputation ruined. He couldn't believe someone had dared to strike such a blow. Who could have done this? Victor realized that the person behind this knew too much about him, that his enemy was not just random, they were smart and cunning. Victor demanded that his people find the culprit. He didn't need details or excuses. He craved revenge. Still not fully understanding how deeply he was caught in the trap, Victor was willing to do anything to regain control of his life. Meanwhile, Emma watched as everything went according to her plan. She knew that Victor would try to find her, and she was ready for it. Her actions were carefully thought out, every step calculated. Now that his world was falling apart, she could enjoy every moment of his downfall. Soon, Emma received a message from one of her agents. Victor had begun his investigation, but all his efforts were in vain. The people he once relied on began to turn away from him. Those who once feared him now felt that his power had waned, and they were in no hurry to help. Emma understood that Victor's next move would be the most dangerous. He was cornered, and his desperation could drive him to extreme measures. But she was prepared. Late one evening, when the pressure on Victor had reached its peak, he received an anonymous message. It contained an address and instructions, promising to unravel the whole situation. In his state, Victor couldn't resist following the directions. He put on his coat and left the house without telling anyone. When he arrived at the address, he was met by an empty, abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. Victor entered, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridors. He was at his limit. A mixture of rage and hopelessness overwhelmed him. Deep down, he sensed it might be a trap, but he couldn't stop. As he entered a small room, dimly lit by an old lamp, he saw Emma. She stood by the window, her back to him, but Victor recognized her instantly. A flash of memories rushed through his mind. The young, naive girl he had once held captive was now standing before him, full of confidence and power. "It's you." His voice trembled with anger. "You ruined my life." Emma slowly turned around. Her face remained calm, but her eyes glowed with cold satisfaction. "Yes, Victor, it's me," she said quietly but firmly. "I've come back to take what you took from me." Victor stepped forward, his fists clenched. He was ready to lunge at her, but something in her gaze stopped him. It wasn't just confidence, it was something more, something that made him realize his helplessness. "You think this is the end," he rasped. "I'll destroy you. You don't know who you're dealing with." Emma merely smirked. "You've already lost, Victor. You have no more power, no more friends. You're alone. All your empires have crumbled. And you know what the worst part is? You did it to yourself." Victor was stunned. He realized that behind this wasn't just a clever plan but a calculation of his pride, of his weaknesses. Emma knew him too well. But why? His voice was full of despair. Why didn't you kill me right away? Emma took a step forward, her gaze fixed on Victor. Because death is too easy. I wanted you to feel everything I felt. Pain, fear, loneliness. You destroyed my life, and now I've destroyed yours. Victor sank to his knees. He understood there was no turning back. He had lost, and the world he had built over the years had turned to dust. Emma turned and headed for the exit, leaving Victor alone with his thoughts. He was broken, and she knew this was the last time they would see each other. But her revenge wasn't yet complete. She knew that now Sophie would belong to her. Victor, no longer having any power or means, would be unable to protect his daughter. She had already arranged with the right people, and soon Sophie would find herself in the same position Emma had once been in. As Emma exited the building and got into her car, she felt a sense of peace for the first time in many years. She had avenged her shattered life, and now she could begin a new chapter. Meanwhile, Victor, left alone in the dark room, realized he had nothing left to lose. The thought of suicide, the only way out of this nightmare, crossed his mind. But before doing so, he wanted to see his daughter's face one last time. That night was Victor Morgan's last. For Emma, it was the beginning of a new life, where she was not a victim but a victor. Chapter 6. Rising from the Ashes. A few days had passed since Victor Morgan's life had ended. His body was found in the same abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. The police ruled it a suicide, and that was the end of it. The media buzzed with news of his death for a few days, but soon everything quieted down. Victor Morgan's story was over, leaving behind only whispers of scandals and a ruined reputation. Emma Carter, whose name no one knew or associated with the events, watched this unfold with cold satisfaction. Her revenge was complete. Victor had received his punishment, and his empire lay in ruins. But Emma knew this wasn't the end of her journey. Now that she had achieved her goal, a new horizon opened before her. She had long planned her next move. Emma wasn't going to stop at destroying Victor. She intended to use everything she had gained to create something new, her own. To use the pain she had endured to build her empire, but of a completely different kind. Shortly after Victor's death, Sophie Morgan was found by the police in one of the city's elite clubs. She was in a state of deep shock, unable to cope with what had happened. Initially, she was sent to a rehabilitation clinic, but soon she was bought out. The money was transferred from an unknown account, and soon the girl found herself in the hands of a new mistress. Emma knew that for Sophie, this would be a true shock. Spoiled and accustomed to a life of luxury, she never imagined she could end up in such a situation. But Emma felt no pity for her. She remembered how she herself had been broken and ruined, but had to get back on her feet and survive. Now it was Sophie's turn to experience this for herself. Sophie found herself in a new world, where she was no longer surrounded by admirers and luxury, where she was no longer adored for her looks and status. Now she was just one of many, whose future depended entirely on those who were stronger. Her new home became what she could never have expected, an escort and intimate services agency run by a new, mysterious mistress. Emma, watching Sophie adapt to her new reality, knew her plans were coming to fruition. The agency she had created was carefully thought out and organized. She had assembled a team of loyal and experienced people who knew how to run such a business. But the key element was that Emma controlled everything from behind the scenes, remaining in the shadows. She didn't just create another escort agency. She built an empire that grew and prospered every day. Sophie, no matter how hard it was for her, quickly realized that her survival depended on her ability to adapt. Emma watched her change, learning to be compliant to survive in this new world. But Sophie was no longer the main character in this story. She had become just one of many, and her fate was entirely in the hands of the one she might have once overlooked. Emma, standing by the window of her new office, looked out at the city that had once taken everything from her but now belonged to her. She knew her path was far from over, but now she was at the top. All those who had once dared to stand in her way had either disappeared or were now working for her. She never forgot her roots, never forgot what she had to go through to get here. But now she was no longer a victim. She had become the one who controlled her destiny and the destinies of others. Emma smiled, realizing that her new life was just beginning. Now she was the one holding all the cards. She was the one who determined fates. And her story, the story of a woman who turned her pain into power, was just beginning. To be continued. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for your attention.